I can guarantee that you've been using at least one of these perks wrong. Today, I wanted to make a list of some of the most popular killer perks in Dead by Daylight and tell you how you are using them wrong. If you're already an expert in DBD, you may know most of these, but for some of you, I'm sure you're not using it in the most optimal way. If you guys enjoy this video and want to see more, go drop a like and subscribe down below. The first one is going to Corrupt Intervention. This perk was nerfed a little bit ago, and it now deactivates as soon as you get a down on a survivor. And this perk is very good if you use it properly, but a lot of people just don't really pay attention to it and just equip it without thinking. Since it deactivates as soon as you get a down, you have to use it with either a setup killer or a hit and run style killer. Obviously, you can use it on whomever you want, but if you want to get the most use out of those 2 minutes of gens being blocked, you really need to divide your pressure amongst multiple people. For setup killers such as Hag or Trapper or even Demogorgon to a certain extent, it's pretty straightforward. Like, you just spend that time setting up your traps or portals and then letting the survivors come to you. But if you're using Corrupt on other killers such as Wraith or Blight or even Nurse, you need to know where multiple survivors are so you can do a hit and run playstyle. Because let's say there's 2 people that spawn right next to each other and you know that they're both there. Instead of just committing to one person and downing them within, 20 to 30 seconds, however long it takes you to win a chase, you instead hit one person and then transfer your pressure to another person and chase them for those 30 seconds. So you're causing one person to be injured, which means they now have to heal. And if they don't have any med kits or self-care perks, then they need another person. So it adds pressure to another person. So this takes 1 and possibly 2 people off the generators. And 2, you're now committing to a chase with somebody so they're off of gens, which means there's only one person possibly working on generators. So your goal is to keep the corrupted gens up for as long as possible. But if you don't know where any other survivor is while in chase, then it might just be worth it to down them. The next spot is going to save the best for last. This is a fairly obvious one, but I see it happening a lot, even in higher skilled killers, and I fall victim to this a lot as well. I'll see so many people throwing the game because they just completely ignore their obsession when they could use them to easily build pressure. This is a really difficult thing to teach because it kind of involves that macro management of the game, but as you get more and more experience while playing killer, you'll start to notice different moments where you should down the obsession versus when you should not. A couple of easy examples I can think of off the top of my head would be like if you're chasing the obsession and you have absolutely zero idea where anybody is, it's better to just hit them so that you build some sort of pressure than to just completely leave them and spend, 20 to 30 seconds looking for somebody else. Or if somebody's on the hook and the obsession is going to save them, you should still pressure them because now you're pressuring 2 people at once. Okay, the next spot is going to Thrilling Tremors. This is a really basic tip, but it'll let you use Thrilling so much more than you would have otherwise. If you are carrying a survivor while your Thrilling goes off of cooldown, literally just drop them and pick them back up to activate Thrilling and then hook them. Of course, you can only do this if you know the survivor's not going to wiggle out, but what this does is not only gives you another use out of your Thrilling Tremors, it gives you information on where to go after hooking the survivor, which is one of the most crucial times to have information. And the reason you should do this is because you'll save so much time in the long run. Like, imagine if you didn't drop them and pick them up. That takes what, 6 seconds maybe versus the 30 seconds to a minute going around the map looking for a survivor. It's so worth it for such little effort. All right, the next spot is going to Lethal Pursuer. Since this perk got buffed, it's been in a lot more perk combinations recently, and for good reason. It's a very, very strong perk. The first half of it is that it shows you the auras of all survivors at the beginning of the match, and I see this mistake constantly. A lot of people who use Lethal Pursuer will look for the closest survivor to them and just try to pressure them as fast as possible. But the best thing to do is to look for the most amount of survivors near each other, because then if you go over there, even if they're further from another survivor, if you go over there, you're now pressuring 2, maybe even 3 survivors instead of just 1. Because even if you get in a chase with one survivor, the other survivor is not going to want to stay near that survivor being chased, and they're going to have to spend time going away from you to work on a generator. So by going to grouped up survivors, you're stalling the progression of gens at the beginning of the match by a substantial amount. And you can also capitalize on this pressure by doing a hit and run type of gameplay so that gens are stalled even further. And then the second half of this perk is that it extends any other aura reading ability, whether that be in the form of a perk or an add-on, by 2 seconds. So please, if you're using Lethal Pursuer, please pair it with another aura reading thing, because if you're not doing this, you're basically wasting half of the perk. Okay, the next spot is actually going to one of the most popular perk combinations in the game, and that is Pain Res Deadman Switch. The reason I'm putting this tip on this list is because I make this mistake so often. Do not, I repeat, do not go on autopilot. What I mean by this is just hooking your survivors on Scourge hooks and just expecting it to magically work without you having to do anything. Yes, this works on some survivors, but against good survivors, Pain Res Deadman Switch is actually very counterable. All somebody has to do is look for the little aura of the person being hooked, because their aura appears before the hook actually registers. So then the survivor working on a gen just lets go of the gen, it gets pain resed, and then just gets straight back on it. And if you, the killer, are on autopilot, you're not going to hear anybody scream, so you're going to assume that nobody's working on the gen that just got pain resed. And this is a terrible, terrible mistake that you could make that could allow a survivor to finish a very crucial gen, such as one that's in a 3-gen setup. So please always try to have information on survivors' whereabouts and on what gens are being worked on, and don't ignore a gen simply because pain res didn't make somebody scream. All right, the next spot is going to Spirit Fury. This is a very popular perk to pair with Enduring. For those of you who don't know, after you break 2 pallets with this perk, the next pallet you're stunned by instantly breaks. And of course, if you pair this with Enduring, you don't get stunned for that long, so the survivor basically gets 0 distance. But I've been seeing a lot of killers with their Spirit Fury already active, kicking pallets while they're in chase. In most situations, you should try to zone the survivor away from that downed pallet so that you can save it for later when you need to recharge your Spirit Fury. Don't be afraid to leave some pallets up to reactivate your Spirit Fury later. Obviously, you cannot do this with gone pallets, and it's best to do it with really unsafe pallets because survivors will likely not want to stay there and take advantage of it anyway. But just try to keep this in mind if you're using that perk combo. The next spot is going to Bamboozle. Do not get bamboozle brained. This is a symptom of many people who use this perk. This is when killers just straight up beeline to the nearest window to vault it while in chase so that they can block it for the survivor. Do not do this. It is so obvious for the survivor that you're going to do this once they know you have bamboozle, and they can get an absolute ton of distance because you're wasting your time vaulting that window. I'll have so many cases where like I'm being chased in shack and I know for a fact that the killer's gonna use their bamboozle on the window, so I just dip. I literally just leave from shack, and sometimes I can make it across the entire map before they catch up to me again. So please use your bamboozle wisely and don't just instantly go to the window. And one of the best uses for bamboozle, especially if you pair it with that new vault perk from Wesker, is to moonwalk vault the window. This is basically when you're chasing a survivor and they vault the window, you pretend to go in the direction that the survivor starts to run so that the survivor starts to run in the other direction, and then you moonwalk back and vault the window so they lose a ton of distance. This is kind of hard to explain, but I hope the example footage in the background helps. Okay, the next perk is an extremely popular gen slowdown perk right now, and that is Hex Pentimento. This perk is pretty much good on every single killer in the game, but in reality, it's better to use it on certain killers and better to use other perks on other killers. In my opinion, it's not worth it to use this perk on killers that don't have any form of mobility, whether that be traversal speed or teleporting. Reason being is because if you're using it on like a regular killer, like Trapper, for example, it'll take you a while to get all the way to a broken totem and rekindle it. And survivors can see that you have Pentimento and will just go back to the totem that they broke to break it again. So basically the value you get from Pentimento with the 50% slowdown kind of gets canceled out by the amount of time it takes for you to get to that totem and how quickly the survivors can cleanse it. Does that make sense? Like if you use it on a killer that has high mobility such as Spirit or Wraith or Blight even, you spend like maybe 5 seconds going to rekindle a totem. So it's quick and efficient and the payoff is completely worth it. Okay, the next spot on the list is going to Jolt, and just like Dead Man Switch, do not go on autopilot with this perk. I make this mistake myself and I see a lot of other killers doing the same exact thing. Do not just throw it on your build and then play killer normally. If you want to get the most use out of it, zone survivors into the area where gens are progressed. 90% of the time, if you're aware of your surroundings, you'll know which gens are being worked on and which gens have a lot of progression. So force survivors to be zoned into those positions of the gens so that you can activate it more often and get more value out of the perk. If you're just mindlessly downing survivors and they're a really good survivor and they know that you have Jolt, they'll run as far as possible away from the gens, not only because it'll help the other people complete it, but also because it won't activate Jolt. So please, even if it takes you a couple extra seconds to zone the survivor closer to a generator, it's worth it to get the slowdown from Jolt. And lastly, the most important perk that you're using wrong is Lightborn. And the reason you're using it wrong is because you're using it to begin with. Do not use this perk if you want to become better at killer. Your chances of winning a game are literally higher if you don't use Lightborn than if you do use Lightborn, especially against quote unquote bully squads. Think about it logically, okay? If you're using Lightborn, that means survivors cannot blind you. So after they try to blind you once, whether that be at a pallet or trying to go for a flashlight save, then they'll be like, oh, this person has Lightborn. I can't use my flashlight, so there's no point in using my flashlight. This means that survivors stop blinding you while you're kicking pallets, which is actually better for you because survivors don't use Iron Will anymore, so if you have headphones, you can easily track them and they lose distance while they're blinding you. And 2, survivors aren't going to be going for flashlight saves anymore, and that's one of the easiest ways to build pressure as a killer. Taking advantage of overly altruistic survivors is the best way to snowball pressure, especially if you're not doing very well in chase. So please just learn to look at a wall to avoid being flashlight saved. If you want to become extremely good at killer, I would recommend checking out this video where I give you 3 tips for every single killer in Dead by Daylight.